Okay, good evening. We are continuing with our analysis of the Rambam's HaKdama LePerush HaMishna. Last session we talked about the Rambam's glowing admiration for Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi and the establishment of the Mishna as the great crowning achievement of the Torah She-Baal, the codification of the oral law from the moment that Moshe Rabbeinu ascends the mountain until around the year 200 CE with the composition of the Mishna by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, and we talked about the significance and impact of that on rabbinic Judaism, on the oral law, on the Torah She-Baal, and really even on the Rambam himself. The Rambam, who lives almost 1,000 years later, is certainly working almost 1,000 years later, and composes his own codification of the oral law, or recodification, and the impact of one on the other. Let's just go a little bit forward here. Here we go. We're in the third section, or the third chapter of the introduction, of the Rambam's introduction to the Mishnah. And the Rambam is talking about this issue of the different components of the Torah She-Baal. Here, for example, I hope that you can all see this. Here you go. The Rambam had made this point about Kol HaTorah ne'emra klaloteha ufrateha v'diktukeha misinai. The Torah was given, I'll translate quite literally now, but it could be that by the time we're done we'll have to reevaluate what the Rambam means by this. But that the Torah was given in all of its detail. Klaloteha, its general principles, ufrateha v'diktukeha, its more specific and minute details were all given at Sinai to Moshe, when Moshe receives the Torah. Mahen oto halachot ha'yechidot asher yo'amru bahem she'hen halakha lemoshe misinai. So the Rambam has a question. We have this notion of a halakha lemoshe misinai, that there were certain halachot that were given to Moshe Rabbeinu when he received the Torah, even though they weren't written down black on white in the Torah. But the Rambam is curious, if we say Kol HaTorah ne'emra klaloteha ufrateha v'diktukeha misinai, if the entirety of the Torah, from the great principles of Anochi Hashem Elokecha down to the Kotzo Shel Yud, the tiny minuscule details, were given at Sinai, what does it mean to classify a halakha as a halakha lemoshe misinai? Isn't everything a halakha lemoshe misinai? Isn't everything given over to Moshe Rabbeinu? V'zeh ikar ra'uish ta'amod alav. This is an important point that we should discuss as the Rambam. V'hu shehaperushim hamikubalim mimoshe ein machloket bahem b'shum panim. The explanations, the received explanations, the received traditions from Moshe, about that there is no machloket, there is no difference of opinion. You'll remember that we left off last time with this question. How could there be machloket? And it's if the system has integrity. If the system has integrity, and the entirety of the Torah was given to Moshe Rabbeinu, and we are the heirs of that Torah, how could there be machloket about anything? Where does that come from? So the Rambam is clarifying that there's not machloket about everything. There's certain things about which there is no there is no difference of opinion. What are those things? So those are the received interpretations, the received explanations of the Torah that were given to us from Moshe. About that there is no debate. Lefi shmei olam lo matzanu machloket shenafla bein hachachamim bein bizman min hazmanim mimoshe v'ad Rav Ashi. So from the time of Moshe until the completion of the Talmud, the Talmud is completed, the Gemara, the commentary on the Mishnah, the expansive commentary on the Mishnah, is completed around 300 years after the codification of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is codified around the year 200, the Gemara around the year 500. So the Rambam says throughout that entire period, there was no machloket about the received traditions from Moshe. What are these received traditions from Moshe? We'll have to explain in a minute. Shamar, we never saw an example, the Rambam says, of somebody that disagreed about this category, and then he begins to give examples of this category. Sorry, just responding to a chat. Ezra, are you online? Ezra, are you there?
Here, yes.
I just got a chat from Joel Nowicki that he's having trouble logging on, and I see that Alan.
Yeah, I got that also.
Okay.
Yeah, I called Alan at home.
Okay, fine. You're on top of it. You're on top of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the examples of halachot about which there's no machloket is the interpretation of a pasuk like ayin ba'ayin, right? That we never said she'echad mehem shemi shesimei ayin adam tisameh eino. The Torah says, we just read it, ayin tachat ayin. The literal reading of that pasuk would be, if you poke out my eye, I get to poke out your eye. That would be the literal reading of that pasuk. But we never ever interpreted that pasuk the way it literally reads. There never was a machloket about this matter, and we always understood that in cases of bodily damage, if Reuven causes bodily damage to Shimon, he blinds him, he pokes out a tooth, what have you, that it means that there's a financial restitution that he has to pay. He has to compensate the damagee for his loss. So the Rambam says this is something about which there was never machloket, even though it's not written that way in the Torah. So, we have all types of cases where there's a tradition of a text and of a way that the text is read. So even, for example, this is an example that we came up with, I think, last semester. This word that I put on the, again, I just mentioned this by way of metaphor. This word that I put up on the board. How do you read that word? We're all native English speakers here. How do you read that word? Esther.
Kernel.
Kernel. So how would you, if you had to write that phonetically, how would you write it? Probably something like that.
N-A-L.
Yeah, or K-E-R-N-O-L, right? Yeah. And if you look in the dictionary, where they give us the next spelling, but where's the R, right? It's a very, very strange word. Now, there are reasons, there are etymological reasons why this word, which I think, comes to English through French or something like that. If you're interested in that, Google the word. I'm sure you'll find a very quick answer. But it's more than just a kri and a chtiv. In English, we know this. Just like in the Torah, Just like in the Torah, we have this tradition of kriyuch tiv. There's certain words that are written one way in the Torah, but when we read them in shul, we read them differently than what they're written. So it's not just that, when you read, in many ways, of course, Hebrew is a much, much, much easier language to learn than English, because Hebrew is a phonetic language, and what you see is what you get, right? The word, if you can decipher the characters and the vowels, you know exactly how to pronounce the word. You may not know what the word means, but you know that you can properly pronounce the word, because there's only one way to pronounce each vowel. There's only one way to pronounce the consonants. But in English, it's completely unlike that. Try, in other words, if you're not a native English speaker, try making sense of how that word, the word that we pronounce thought, it's a silent G. What's a silent G, right? I'm sure we can all think of dozens of examples. So I think we talked about this last semester when we talked about kriyuch tiv, about the written and the spoken tradition. Oh, no. We spoke about it when we were learning Masechet Sanhedrin, which was probably 2 semesters ago. Some of you were with us for that, about kriyuch tiv. But here, it's not exactly parallel, but the idea that there's a pasuk that says ayin ba'ayin, or ayin tachat ayin, an eye for an eye, but it doesn't matter what's written. Ayin tachat ayin means financial retribution. But for whatever reason the Torah chose, it's not written that way. It's written in a shorthand. And we all know that language means certain things, and sometimes it's meant literally, and sometimes it's meant figuratively, and sometimes, depending upon the inflection, it means the exact opposite of what it is. So that, for example, and you have to know that there's a tradition of how these things work. What's the meaning of this word? Anyone? Anyone? The red word at the top of the board here. Don't you see what I wrote up on the board?
No. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So what's the meaning of that word?
Yes.
Yes, the affirmative. So there's a general notion that in languages, and it's not just true in English, it's true also in Hebrew, that if we double something, it emphasizes it. So that if somebody asks you a question and you say no, you could also say no, 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 and that makes it more emphatic. If you're writing dialogue, that makes it more emphatic. But if you were to say, so yeah means yes, it means to affirm something. But what does that mean? It means the exact opposite, depending upon the inflection. If somebody says something and you respond, yeah, it means you're affirming it. If somebody says something and you respond, yeah, what does that mean? The exact opposite. And these are all, again, don't let me overstate these metaphors, because they're like all metaphors, they're imperfect. But it shows that in any written text, in language, there has to be an interpretive tradition of what it means. And for an outsider, it would seem completely unintelligible. It would really seem completely unintelligible. So ayin tachat ayin, if you land from Mars and you don't know anything at all about Judaism or about the Torah or about the Bible, and you check into a motel and you take the Bible out of the example I've given in the past, this Martian, right? How he's going to read the written Torah without any context. So ayin tachat ayin literally probably means you poke out my eye, I get to poke out your eye. You hit me, I get to hit you. You poke out my tooth, you knock out my tooth, I'm entitled to knock out your tooth. But the tradition is that that's not how the pasuk is read. That phrase means something else. V'amar acher shehadamim bilvad hu chayav. That it's merely a matter of financial restitution. And about this matter, there never was, says the Rambam, there never was machloket. There never was another tradition. There never was another tradition of how to interpret this pasuk, and that's the pshat of the pasuk. You know that we talk about the different levels of biblical interpretation. Generally, we talk about pardes, pshat, remez, drash, sod. 4 different modes or levels of biblical interpretation. And generally, we say that pshat means the literal reading. Here, hold on a second. Why is this not working for me? No. Not sure if the Hebrew is displaying properly. I apologize. I recently got a new computer, and you'd think a new computer is better, but sometimes the newer computers cause some problems with the interface, which we're trying to work out between Windows 7 and the software. And I hope that displays properly. Pshat. Pshat generally means the simple interpretation. It does not mean the literal Pshat, like in Hebrew, we also have the word pashut. Pashut meaning simple. So pshat doesn't mean the literal interpretation. It means the simple interpretation or the accepted interpretation. So the pshat of ayin tachat ayin, it's a mistake to say that the pshat of ayin tachat ayin means you poke out my eye, I poke out your eye, but that the drash is you don't literally poke out a person's eye, you pay the money. The pshat of ayin tachat ayin, the simple reading of ayin tachat ayin, is financial retribution. But even though the words literally would read, according to the Martian landing in the motel, would mean my eye for your eye. V'lo matzanu gam machloket b'mamar Hashem pri eitz hadar, says the Rambam. In Parshat Emor, by Sukkot, there, pri eitz hadar. Pri eitz hadar is what we call an etrog. Hold on a second. Let me. There was another document that I wanted to load up. Give me 1 second to load up the document. There you go. Right. The Torah says that on Sukkot, "Ulakachtem lochem biyom harishon pri eitz hadar apot marim anaf eitz avot arvei nachal smachtem lefnei Hashem Elokechem shivat yamim." I know that a number of you are learning Masechet Sukkah with us now. Sherry asks, how do we know where the pshat is literal and where not? That's what the Torah She-Baal is. The Torah She-Baal is the tradition of how to read the Torah. And those traditions are how you interpret the Torah. That was largely what Rashi's agenda was. Rashi's agenda in interpreting Chumash was to fill in the pshat reading. Right? To tell you that when you see the words yeah, yeah, it doesn't mean double yes. It means double no. It's to give you the code, as it were. By code, I don't mean in any way those Torah codes, you know, you know what I mean by the Torah codes, where if you read every 63rd letter and you put it together and read it backwards and hold it up in a mirror, it gives you like the results of the 1942 World Series. I mean, the code of how to read the Torah, what the proper interpretation of the Torah is, and when it's literal, and when it's literal, figurative. That's the agenda of the Torah She-Baal Peh. And Rashi, in trying to anthologize the entirety of the Torah She-Baal Peh into a running commentary on the Chumash, is helping us out with that. But without Rashi, we could just learn all of the Midrash and all of the Gemara and etc. And we'd know it that way, or our teachers would tell us. That's what Torah She-Baal Peh is. The Torah She-Baal Peh, learning Gemara at its heart, or even learning Mishna at its heart, is the attempt to explain what the Torah is getting at, and what the words, what the psukim mean normatively. So L'kachtem lachem b'yom harishon pri eitz hadar. So again, literally, pri eitz hadar means the fruit of a hadar tree. What hadar means, we would have to understand, but let's take it to mean pretty or goodly. So you have to take for yourself on the first day the fruit of a good tree, of a pretty tree. Let's leave the other three minim out of it. So what's the fruit of a good tree, a pretty tree? Perhaps it means anything that looks nice. That there's certain fruits that are very pretty, and there's certain fruits that are very ugly, and you can take anything. No, but the Rambam says that this is the esrog, right? In English it's called the citron, and that about this matter, the identification of these four species for Sukkot, about this, there is no machloket. Right? Right, about this there was never machloket. There was never an alternate tradition. There was never, even though the Gemara in Masechet Sukkah entertains hava aminot, it hypothesizes why is it an etrog and not something else. But those are merely hypotheses, meaning ideas that are raised for the purpose of rejecting them, in order to bolster the tradition that it really is in fact an etrog. And there was never a case that somebody said it was an etrog and somebody said it was a parish. A parish is a different type of fruit. Probably what's called today a quince, which looks something like an ugly apple. But you can Google it and find a picture of it. O rimon, o zuladze. Velo matzano gam kain machloket be'etz avot. There was never a machloket about what the eitz avot is, right? Shehu hahadas, the myrtle, right? These are the hadassim here on the left. About the hadassim, there was never a machloket, even though the Torah does not tell you hadassim. It uses some kind of nickname, right? That it's called the eitz avot. From the fact that the Torah calls it an eitz avot, Chazal learn out something about what's the nature of the hadassim, or what's the appearance of the hadassim. But about this, the Rambam says, these were all the received traditions, from Moshe. Mikubalim mi Moshe. Again, mikubal or Kabbalah here has nothing at all to do with mysticism, with the colloquial understanding of the term Kabbalah. It has to do with the reception of the anachnu mikablim. We receive these traditions and we hopefully pass them on. And then the Rambam gives other examples of where the literal reading of the Torah is at best unclear, or at worst, right? Pre-Eitz Hadar is unclear. We don't know what that means without a tradition that tells us what it means, without a tradition that points to a specific fruit on the store shelf. Other cases, it's not merely that we don't know what it means, but it would lead us in the wrong direction. Ayin tachat ayin, an eye for an eye, if implemented literally, would lead us to a mistake. It's not just that we're left in the dark; it would lead us in the opposite direction. So the Rambam gives a number of different examples, and he says, "Umashu kiyotze bezeh b'chol hamitzvot ein machloket bo lefi shehem kulam perushim mikubalim mimoshe va'aleihem va'al domehem amru kol haTorah ne'emra koloteh u'prateh v'diktukeh aval im heyotam mikubalim ve'ein machloket bahem חוכמת המקרא הנתון שאפשר להוציא ממנו אלו הפירושים והאפנים מן ההקשים והסמכים והרמזים וההודעות המצויים בכתוב, וכאשר תראם בתלמוד נושאים ונותנים ונחלקים במערכת העיון ומביאים ראיה על דבר מאלו הפירושים ודומיהם, כאמרם במאמר יתרו פרי עץ הדר, אולי הוא רימון, אולי הוא פריש או זולתם. So when the Gemara has a discussion about the nature of all of these things, that doesn't mean that there's a machloket about what an etrog is, but is trying to get at something else. So when the Gemara suggests hypothetically, it's in the realm of the hypothetical. When the Gemara says maybe the pre-Eitz Hadar is a pomegranate, or etc., right? So it's there to teach you what pre-Eitz is and what Hadar is, right? Eitz Shatam Eitzo Piryo Shavin V'Amar Achar Pri Hadar Bilano Mishana L'Shana. These are different teachings in Sechet Sukkah about the etrog, But it's not that there was a machloket about the essential definition. Ela ra'inu b'lo safek miYehoshua ad elenu she'etrog haya nital im halulav b'chol shana ve'ein machloket b'zeh. אמנם הם חוקרים אחר ההוראה המצויה, כתוב, זה הפירוש המקובל. Hold on a second, let me just look at the chat. Somebody wrote something in the chat. So Sherry asks, are there textual clues that tell us that a discussion such as this example is hypothetical and not an actual debate? I mean, there aren't textual clues in the Torah. You're asking are there textual clues in the Gemara. Yeah, so in the Gemara, it's clear that there's never a tradition of. In other words, in the Gemara, there's no machloket about the identification. You never have a statement where one of the Tanoim or one of the Amoraim says, pre-Eitz Hadar means pomegranate, or pre-Eitz Hadar means an apple, or pre-Eitz Hadar means a watermelon, right? And the nature of the discussions about what the message of the pasuk is, in both cases, they're all pointing to etrog for different reasons. They're trying to say, in what way is an etrog hadar? In what way is an etrog beautiful? It's beautiful because it has something to do with the way that the fruit tastes, or the way the taste of the fruit resembles the taste of the tree, whatever that means, or it's beautiful in the way that the fruit remains on the tree. But everybody agrees that it's an etrog. It's just a debate about what the symbolism, what the word hadar symbolizes. So then it becomes clear. Let's go on just a bit. וזהו העניין אמרם כללותיה ופרטיה. So when the Rambam says, when the Gemara says that all of the Torah was given, klal ufrat, general principles and specific details, klomar shehadvarim asher tireh otanu motziim otam b'chlal ufrat v'chein b'shar 13 midot heim mikubalim mimoshe misinai. The klal ufrat, general principles and specific details, the 13 principles by which the Torah is, the hermeneutical principles, the 13 principles by which the Torah is interpreted, that these themselves are given from Sinai. I hope you've had a chance to look at, and I mentioned to you before, and I put it up on our Shir's homepage, that it's worth looking over that brisa, the 13 midot she'Torah nidreshet bahem, the hermeneutical principles. Hermeneutics is a fancy term that means the modes of interpretation, or the rules or methods of interpretation. The methods of interpreting psukim is part of what was given over to Moshe. That when you see a pasuk, that there's a mode of interpreting it. And those things that are learned out by the Chachamim through the 13 principles, the application of those principles, at least the application through consensus of the Chachamim, generate Torah Misinai. So that there are at least two different ways or two different directions that Chazal interpret psukim. There's a type of derivative focus, and there's a type of attributive focus. Sometimes Chazal are looking to derive the halakha. They're trying to determine what is the Torah getting at. And other times, they're trying to hook something back to a pasuk. The Rambam goes on to explain, Ulam im heyotam mikubalim in Moshe lo yamru behem halakha lemoshe misinai. Lefi she'anu lo namar pri etz hadar hu etrog halakha lemoshe misinai. So when we say that the pri etz hadar is not a halakha lemoshe misinai, that doesn't mean that Moses was unaware of it. And the Rambam here is going to differentiate between types of interpretation which have a hook in the text and types of interpretation which stand free of the text. When there's a textual hint at something, but it is unclear, when the Torah says ayin tachat ayin, an eye for an eye, or a tooth for a tooth, and we have a tradition that that pasuk is interpreted in the following way, against the literal meaning, that is not a halakha lemoshe misinai. That is a halakha which is learned out from the interpretive process. But when there's a halakha which has no textual hook, that's what's called a halakha lemoshe misinai. Right, so the Rambam says, one second. Here you go. A moment, please. There you go. I hope you can see the arrow. We don't call the identification of the Pri Etz Hadar, we don't call that a halakha lemoshe misinai. And we don't call the case of chovel b'chavero mishalem mamon, we don't call the halakha that if you poke out my eye, you owe me money. That's also similarly not a halakha lemoshe misinai. Why are those things not classified as halachot lemoshe misinai? Because ho'il ukvar hushrash etzlenu Ki haperushim kulam Moshe. Clearly, all of the interpretations go back to Moshe. V'yesh lehem k'Moshe amarnu hora'at bakatuv. But these things are written in the Torah. When it says ayin tachat ayin, what does that mean? It means money. When it says pri etz hadar, what does it mean? It means etrog. What's the problem? We just might not know that without the tradition that that's how it's read. And if we try to read it outside of the tradition, independent of the tradition, we're going to come to the wrong conclusion. If I don't know anything about the English language, I'm going to mispronounce that word. But if I'm a member of the community, if I'm the recipient of the tradition about how to read English, I'm going to pronounce that word kernel, like a kernel of corn, and not kolonol, which is not a word. But I only know that, I only get it right if I'm a recipient of the interpreted tradition. But what's a halakha lemoshe misinai? A halakha lemoshe misinai is not how to read the Torah. It's not a stop sign that tells you pri etz hadar means etrog. Right? As if we could. That's why I compared it to kri uchtiv. That's why I compared it to the case of kri uchtiv, where there's certain things that are written in the Torah one way but pronounced another. But pri etz hadar is a type of kri uchtiv on the plane of ideas, right? It's written pri etz hadar, but when you read it, you know it means an esrog. It says ayin tachat ayin, but I know that it means something else, right? It's like any type of being inside the language. I know that when my particularly my oldest son, and this is true probably for all children, we used to say that the sarcasm gene hadn't kicked in yet because he just did not get sarcasm. And around our house, there's not a small amount of sarcasm. And think about it. Just try to pay attention in the workplace or in your family, around the table, wherever you are in life. There's always about a certain amount of sarcasm. It's an interpretive tool in language. It's a way we encode meaning to language where it means something else other than the literal black on white, what the sentence might mean outside of the context of how we embed meaning into it. So I don't know. Imagine the humor. I mean, it's probably like a Marx Brothers routine. Imagine the humor just sitting around lunch in the workplace. If you interpret every sarcastic comment, even mildly sarcastic comments, as sincere, as literally sincere, you'd be led to all types of humorous, at best humorous and at worst tragic results. But you have to know that when somebody spills something all over the rug and somebody says, "Oh, great," they're not actually saying, "Hey, that's really fantastic." It means the exact opposite. They're being sarcastic, and that's the meaning of "Oh, great" is. Even though a literal meaning would lead you to the opposite conclusion. So the Torah She-Baal Peh colors it codes the meaning so that you know when "oh great" means yay and when "oh great" means the exact opposite. That's what the Torah She-Baal Peh is. What's the literal meaning? What's the pshat of oh great, when something spills on the rug. The pshat is that's really bad. These are not halachot lemoshe misinai. None of these. These are, of course, are my examples. But these examples that we gave earlier, etrog, ayin tachanayin, these are not halachot lemoshe misinai. This is the proper way to read the pasuk. Halakha lemoshe misinai, on the other hand, is, the Rambam says, kol inyan she'ein lo hora'ah bekatuv. The category that we call halakha lemoshe misinai are all of the laws given by Hashem to Moshe, which Moshe passed over to us, all of the laws that do not have that textual hook. Right? Ayin tachat ayin has a textual hook. You just have to know how to read the text. Right? But halakha lemoshe misinai are things that don't have something in the text and can't be derived from the text. Through the hermeneutical principles. What the Rambam here calls hekesh. Hekesh, I told you, is sometimes is a synonym for all of the interpretive rules of drasha. Bezeh bilvad yamar halakha lemoshe misinai. And then the Rambam gives you a list of 30 some odd halachot lemoshe misinai, depending on how you count. And this is the one place where we've collected up the list of all of the halachot lemoshe misinai. I'll just mention some of them. It would take quite a few shiurim to go through all of them. But first of all, just to know, if somebody, this is a question that comes up, how do we know what the halachot lemoshe misinai are? So the Rambam has gathered them together here in the introduction to the commentary on the Mishna. Let's just pick a few of them. Tefillin. Tefillin and mezuzot and Sefer Torah, the laws of how these things are written. Now, there's the Torah, interestingly, the Torah doesn't specify precisely what tefillin are. And it doesn't specify precisely how they're made, or what they look like, or what's inside of them. The Torah does talk about totafot vayu l'ot al yodecha vayu l'totafot bein einecha, like we say in the Kriyat Shema. But we're not even sure precisely what the word totafot means. If you read the Ramban on that pasuk, he says a number of different interesting things in this matter. All of these are halachot lemoshe misinai. The shin shebetfillin, the kesher shebetfillin, right? These are all things that are halachot lemoshe misinai. The way the straps are tied, like we say in the Anam Zmirot. It's become much more popular to sing the Anam Zmirot at the end of Shabbat davening. Kesher tefillin hera ve'enav. That the tefillin knot, the way in which the tefillin is bound and tied, that this was shown to Moshe. Ritzuot shchorot. Nowhere in the Torah does the Torah say that the tefillin have to be black, specifically that the straps have to be blackened. That's a halakha lemoshe misinai. It's not part of the halachot mikubalot because it doesn't have a textual hook to it. It's just something that if you know it, you know it. If you don't know it, there's no way we'd be able to derive it from the text. God says to Moshe, Totafot beinecha. Moshe's the scribe, Moshe's the secretary. He's taking dictation up there on Har Sinai, and he writes down Totafot beinecha. And then he says, hey, time out. Pardon me, God, what are Totafot? And God explains. They're these boxes, they're they're perfectly square, they have parshiot in them, they have these scroll pieces in them with the following text. They're black, the straps have to be perfectly black, etc. That's all the instruction manual, the oral instruction manual that comes along with it. Sherry asks about kashrut. So the idea, the principle of kashrut is in the Torah. The Torah in a few different places points out that there are things that are forbidden to eat, there are things that are okay to eat. The Torah itself points out the general principle, at least, of meat and milk. But the Torah doesn't spell out precisely what meat and milk is. And we learn out from the fact, as a perfect example, the Torah 3 times says, Lo tivashel gidi b'chalev imo. 3 times this pasuk is repeated, that you shouldn't cook a kid in its mother's milk. And the Chazal learn out from this, that that there's 3 components to the prohibition. That you can't cook meat and milk together, even if you don't eat it. You're not allowed to cook it together. There's an independent prohibition of cooking meat and milk together, even if you're not going to eat it. There's no prohibition, at least not from the Torah, to cook shrimp, which is not kosher. You just can't eat it. But meat and milk, you're not even allowed to create this mixture. There's a separate isser, a separate prohibition to eat meat and milk that have been cooked together. And there's a third prohibition that you're not allowed to derive any benefit from meat and milk that's been cooked together. And this is a halakha mikubelet, learned out from the 3-time repetition of that pasuk. So some things in kashrut, the fact that a pig is not kosher, the fact that pork is not kosher, right? So that's not a halacha, that's just a halacha. That's the Torah, that's beferush, right? It's spelled out specifically in the Torah that you can't eat pork. This idea about the nature of meat and milk, that's probably more in the category of the halakha mikubelet, because it's learned out from this repetition. Or certainly the idea that you can't benefit from hana. The Torah specifies you can't cook it together, but we learn out about the eating and the benefits from the interpreted tradition. And then there are other things that are halachot lemoshe misinai. Kashrut, of course, is a very multifaceted halakha. So those anyway, these are some of the examples of the halachot lemoshe misinai. And the Rambam lists them. You can go through them if you're interested. The Rambam then goes on. Oh no! All right. So we'll stop at that. But I just wanted to very quickly look at something else here. The Rambam then goes on. I'll just introduce this topic before we get to it next time. Well, what's the difference? HALAKHAH LEMOSHE MISINAI, is that min HaTorah? Is that biblical in nature? What do you think? Lou? Here, vote. HALAKHAH LEMOSHE MISINAI. Is it min HaTorah or is it mid-Rabbanan? Raise your hands from the participants panel. Raise your hands if you think HALAKHAH LEMOSHE MISINAI is mid-Rabbanan, is rabbinic in nature. Raise your hand if you think that HALAKHAH LEMOSHE MISINAI is... Esther, which one did you vote? Oops, I just muted you. I'm going to unmute you. HALAKHAH LEMOSHE MISINAI, is it rabbinic or biblical?
I think it's rabbinic.
Alan, what do you say?
No.
Alan?
Biblical.
It's biblical. Even though it's not written in the Torah. You just have to be clear on something. When we say these two categories, midei Rabbanan or min haTorah, rabbinic or biblical, biblical doesn't mean that it's written in the Bible. It means that it was commanded by God. And even though it's only written either between the lines of the Bible, like the halachot mekubalot. The halachot mekubalot are the things that are written between the lines. And the Torah She-Baal Peh teaches you how to read between the lines. And the halachot lemoshe misinai are the things that aren't even written between the lines, but they're commanded by God. So when we say something is min haTorah, from the Torah or biblical in force, it doesn't mean that it is or is not written in the Torah. It means that it's God-given as opposed to enacted by the rabbis. So for example, we're coming up on Purim. Purim is a rabbinic holiday. It takes place after the Bible is written. The Chachamim, the sages, innovate it. They do it according to a certain model, but it's completely rabbinic in nature. But the fact that the tefillin has to be black, the straps of the tefillin have to be black, even though nowhere in the Torah does it say that, that is a Torah obligation, because the HALAKHAH LEMOSHE MISINAI. God said this is the requirement. So it's min haTorah in the sense that God commanded it. The question is, how do we count the mitzvot? We have this notion from here in the end of Masechet Makot, Darash Rabbi Simloi, 613 mitzvot ne'emru lo LaMoshe, 365 lavin כמניין ימות החמה, 248 כנגד איבריו של אדם. There are 613 mitzvot, 365 negative commandments, 248 positive commandments, symbolically representative of different things. Everybody agrees to this. Everybody agrees to this number, that there's 613 mitzvot. But there is not unanimity about how to count. It's interesting that the Gemara itself does not give you a list of what the 613 mitzvot are, but it appears to be this drasha of Rabbi Simloi, of how we get to the number 613, which is actually based upon a gematria of the word Torah. I see there's a typo here on the page. It says Ora, it should be Torah. When I cut and pasted it, I must have chopped off a letter. Torah tziva lanu Moshe, Morasha, Torah begematria 611, Shitmea v'chadsarei, 611. The gematria of Torah is 611. 400 plus 6 plus 200 plus 5 is 611. Anochi v'lo yeh lecha mipi hagvura shamanu. Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Moshe taught us Torah. Moshe taught us 611 mitzvot. 2 mitzvot, the first 2 of the 10 commandments, the Jewish people heard directly from Hashem. 611 plus 2 is 613. So this notion obviously predates Rabbi Simloi. This was a long-standing tradition, that there are 613 mitzvot, 248 plus 365. But how you determine what they are is a matter of debate. So already from the times of the Geonim, and then later the Rishonim, there was a tradition of trying to enumerate what the 613 mitzvot are. But even though there's unanimity about most things, I mean, everybody agrees that tefillin is a mitzvah. There's no Rishon that thinks that tefillin is not a mitzvah. But there's a machloket about whether tefillin is 1 mitzvah or 2 mitzvot. Do you read it Is it one composite mitzvah with two parts, one on the hand and one on the head? Or are these two separate, but obviously related, mitzvot? So if you think that tefillin is two separate mitzvot, like, by the way, the Rambam does. The Rambam counts them as two separate mitzvot. So then you have to take something off the list. If you think that tefillin is only one mitzvah with two parts, then you have to find something else to add to the list. The Rambam wrote the Sefer HaMitzvot, which is a kind of preamble to the Mishnah Torah. He wrote it before he wrote the Mishnah Torah. But the Sefer HaMitzvot is his list of the 613 mitzvot. And a very, very short essay on each of the 613 mitzvot. But before he sets out what he thinks that 613 mitzvot are, he lists 14 shorashim, 14 root principles, and he explains how he does his counting. He explains how he derives what gets counted as a mitzvah and what doesn't get counted as a mitzvah. Among the significant things that emanate from these 14 principles, not to be confused, please don't confuse these with his famous 13 principles of faith, which we learned together last semester. These 14 roots or 14 principles are the rules by which you determine the count of what gets counted as a mitzvah and what does not. That does not constitute the end-all and be-all of rabbinic, or of the end-all and be-all of religious life and obligation. There are certain things that are obligatory, even obligatory min ha-Torah, but for technical reasons don't get counted separately on the list of the 613 mitzvot. But they're there. They're obligatory. Next week, we'll look here at this second shoresh, where the Rambam discusses the themes that we touched on tonight in terms of how things get counted and what's the difference between something which is explicit in the Torah, something which is learned out from a textual hook, and HALAKHAH LEMOSHE MISINAI, the obligatory and authentic interpretations which are not rooted in the text itself. If you're interested, I encourage you to go to our Shir homepage and look up this source called Shoresh 2, I think it's called, and to study it or look it over before our next session, next Thursday night. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
How are you, Esther?
Fine. I wanted to tell you I found out about Humpty Dumpty from the sublime to the ridiculous.
Oh, yeah?
Humpty Dumpty was a cannon, and it was on a wall defending the town of Colchester. And during the wars between the king's men and the Roundheads fired a...
What are the Roundheads?
Roundheads was Oliver Cromwell's men were called Roundheads. Do you remember him?
I do. I was unfamiliar with the term Roundheads.
Yeah. So they fired a shot at the cannon, and evidently it fell down, and all the king's men couldn't put it together again.
Hello?
But it was a cannon, not an egg. Okay?
Hello? Okay. Sorry, Esther, I seem to have lost you. But I'm
Okay.
signing off.
Okay, goodbye. Thank you very much.